Everyone knows the postcard version. Salmon swim upriver, die, and their bodies fertilize the forest. Ocean nutrients, carried inland on the backs of fish, feeding the trees. It's one of the most beautiful ideas in ecology. And it's true, in the right place, at the right scale. On the Elwha River, in Olympic National Park on Washington's Olympic Peninsula, scientists went looking for that story after the dams came down. And what they found is more honest and stranger than the postcard. Do salmon really fertilize a forest? On the Elwha, so far, the answer is the animals, yes. The trees, not yet. Start with the mechanism, because it's real and it's remarkable. A salmon spends most of its life in the open Pacific, and while it's out there, it eats. It builds nearly its entire body out of ocean food, packing its flesh with nutrients that only exist in abundance at sea. One of those is a heavy form of nitrogen called nitrogen-15. Think of it as a chemical dye, or a fingerprint. Land plants and freshwater creatures carry very little of it. Ocean creatures are loaded with it. So when a salmon dies far inland, its body is essentially a package stamped unmistakably made in the ocean. Anything that eats that salmon or grows in the soil where it decays inherits the stamp, and scientists can measure it, atom by atom, to trace exactly how far the sea has traveled up a mountain. For most of the last century on the Elwha, the answer was not at all. The 105-foot Elwha Dam and the 210-foot Glines Canyon Dam didn't just block fish, they blocked the flow of ocean nutrients into the entire upper watershed. For over 90 years, from their construction in the early 1900s until their removal between 2011 and 2014, the forests and creeks above the dams were cut off from the sea's fertilizer completely. The Lower Elwha Klallam Tribe, whose culture and sustenance had been tied to these salmon runs for generations, had watched that connection severed and fought for decades to see it restored. Biologists describe rivers like that with a cold, clinical word, oligotrophic. It means nutrient poor, starving, a river running on empty. So when the dams fell and salmon, chinook, coho, steelhead trout, pink salmon began pushing back into that starved country, the question was simple and profound. How fast does the ocean return to the land? Before they could even answer it, scientists wanted to know how the process was supposed to work, so they ran a controlled experiment. In the years before the dams came out, they placed salmon carcasses into Elwha side channels and watched, chemically, where the ocean nitrogen went and how fast. The results were revealing. The marine nitrogen moved into the food web quickly but unevenly. The plant-eating insects, the grazers, picked it up first, incorporating a meaningful share of it within a month or two of the carcasses arriving. The predators that ate those insects lit up a little later, and then, just as fast, the signal faded. Within about 7 months, the system had washed back down to its normal, nutrient-poor baseline, as if the pulse had never happened. That was the crucial early lesson. A few salmon don't permanently enrich a river. They deliver a brief, bright pulse that the food web absorbs and then burns through. To truly fertilize a watershed, you don't need a handful of fish once. You need a flood of them every single year for years. With that in mind, the real test began once the dams were gone and living salmon started returning on their own. And the first clear answer came from an unlikely messenger, a small, round, slate-gray bird called the American dipper. The dipper is the only songbird in North America that hunts underwater. It walks straight into a rushing river and strolls along the bottom, plucking up aquatic insects and tiny fish. It lives its entire life within a few feet of the water, which makes it a perfect sensor. If the ocean's fingerprint is entering the food web, a dipper will carry it. So a team led by ecologist Chris Tonra, working with the Lower Elwha Klallam Tribe, caught and tested dippers along the Elwha, and the result they published in 2015 in the journal Biological Conservation was striking. Within a single year of the first dam coming down, the signal was already there. The birds were carrying measurably more ocean nitrogen in their blood than before, even though these dippers hadn't seen a salmon in 100 years. The sea had come back, and you could read it in the blood of a songbird. And Tonra's team had already shown what this meant for the dippers themselves. Birds with access to salmon and their eggs live richer lives. They hold territory year-round instead of leaving. They're in better condition, and they raise more young. The returning fish didn't just feed the river. They upgraded the lives of the creatures along it. The dipper wasn't alone. The Lower Elwha Klallam Tribe ran its own 4-year study, radio-tracking river otters through the watershed, a sleek predator patrolling the same banks. And the otters told the same story. Their diets, too, showed more of the ocean's chemical signature after the dams came down than before. Two very different animals, a tiny bird and a river-dwelling carnivore, both quietly testifying to the same thing. The Pacific was flowing back into the valley, not as water, but as chemistry, moving up the food chain one meal at a time. But here is the honest twist the postcard leaves out. The nutrients reach the bird, they reach the otter. They have not yet reached the trees. In a 2020 study, researchers led by Kane tested the riverside soils above the old dams, looking for that same rich marine signal in the roots of Sitka spruce and western red cedar. They found only faint traces, not the lush fertilization the famous version of the story promises. And the reason is exactly what that early carcass experiment predicted. There simply aren't enough salmon yet. The postcard image of a forest visibly fattened by the sea depends on that annual flood of fish dying year after year, their bodies piling into the system faster than it can burn the nutrients away. On the Elwha, the salmon are still climbing back from near zero. Chinook remains scarce. The great yearly tide of carcasses that would truly saturate a forest simply hasn't arrived. It may take decades. So the real picture is this. When you reconnect a river to the ocean, the sea doesn't rush back into the land like a tide. It seeps in, slowly, from the bottom up. It shows up first in the smallest, fastest moving lives. The insects, the birds that eat them, the otters that patrol the banks, the microbes in the stream bed, before it ever climbs into the soil, the roots, and the ancient trunks of the trees. The food web fills before the forest does. There's something almost poetic in the order of it. We imagine restoration as a grand, sweeping event. A wall comes down and life floods back. But on the ground, the ocean returns to a forest the way water fills a dry sponge, invisibly at first, one cell at a time. The trees on the Elwha have not yet been fed by the sea, they have only been promised. And the messenger carrying that promise up the valley isn't a bear dragging a carcass into the woods, the way the legend always tells it. It's a small gray bird walking on the bottom of a cold river with the chemistry of the Pacific Ocean quietly rising in its blood. That's the deeper truth of dam removal. The dramatic part, the explosions, the draining reservoirs, the first fish swimming through, is over in a season. But the real work, the slow return of the ocean to the mountain, is measured not in headlines but in atoms. And it is only just beginning. Because the ocean's slow, invisible return is only one way this river is coming back to life. Next time, a louder one. When these same dams fell, they unleashed a century of trapped earth all at once, and the Elwha used it to build 40 acres of brand new coastline raised out of the sea in just a few years. This river didn't only come back to life, it started rebuilding the ground that life stands on. That's next on Rewilded.